College Football Nation continues to expect TCU to fall at some point. Well, there's only one more opportunity here. Kansas State for a second time lining up against TCU. The Wildcats had a 18-point lead when they met in the regular season, but TCU came all the way back to win it. One more chance. They go to 13-0. They're going to be in the college football playoff, whether people like it or not. We got Steve Merrill here from Wager Talk to break down the betting angle. Steve joins us each and every week. Steve, look at this one. TCU, a 2.5-point favorite against Kansas State. And, of course, TCU's been hanging by a thread against most teams, but then they broke out and just blasted Iowa State by 48 last week.
You know what's really interesting, Mark, is we talked about this on the USC channel for the USC-Utah game. Both teams, USC and TCU, are exactly 2.5-point favorites. Obviously, 3 is a very key number, so there's about a 9% chance they win by 3. So 2.5 or less, you really get down to almost a straight-up win situation. Yet, if you look at the money line on these games, the math model, the money line projection has USC slightly bigger favorite. They're about minus 150 on the money line. TCU is only minus 135. So when you do the math, kind of the true odds are in between that and the underdog price. USC has a 58% chance, according to the odds makers, to win straight up. TCU only has a 56% chance to win straight up, even though they're both exactly 2.5-point favorites. It's kind of interesting. And what's even some more surprising is that the over-under is around 61.5 versus 67 in the Utah game. So a higher scoring game should be more random than a lower scoring game with the 2.5-point favorite. So I think some of that is what you're talking about here, that the betting markets themselves have TCU has to lose at some point, right? They can't keep going undefeated this season. So according to the odds, they have a 56% chance to win. USC has a 58% chance to win. So the odds are both of them do not win. That comes out to less than 50%, which means Ohio State probably sneaks in. Alabama probably needs them both to go down to sneak in from that 6th spot since neither one is playing. Let's look at my database simulation. TCU by 1.8. So I have them winning by 2 points in this game. So they likely do squeak it out, but it's pretty much a toss-up. I have TCU in my power ratings finally crack. I run numerous sets of power ratings. They've been outside the top 10 all season. They just barely cracked number 10 in one of the ratings. They're still outside the top 10 in the other. So they're not one of the 4 best teams, but neither is Kansas State. And that's the thing. That's who they're playing at 9-3 straight up. The Wildcats, this will be their biggest game of the season. Impressed that they didn't really get too flat against rival Kansas in their last game, because obviously there is a look ahead here. But then again, Kansas was a big game. That was an in-state rival. They won that one by 20 and covered. Offense is really clicking for Kansas State here. They've put up 95 points those last 2 games against West Virginia and Kansas. 2 below average defenses, obviously. TCU, not a great defense, but they're above average. 5.5 allowed against teams that average 5.8. Kansas State on the season, though, averaging 6.3. So this is a pretty big step up in class for TCU and that defense that just held Iowa State and offensively challenged Iowa State to just 14 points. We'll see how it plays out. I'll stick with my model. I'll say TCU by 2, but I really think this game's a toss-up.
An interesting note to the first matchup is that starting quarterback Adrian Martinez was knocked out of the game in the first series for Kansas State. Will Howard came in, and he played remarkably well, built that 18-point lead. Then he got knocked out, and they went with the third-string quarterback in the fourth quarter for K-State, and that's when it all fell apart, mostly. TCU was starting a comeback with the second stringer on the field, but that's certainly key in that first matchup, and we'll see the next go-around, TCU and Kansas State. Also of note, Steve, I don't know how you consider this. Looking at Ohio State and Alabama, of course, both on the sideline, it makes perfect sense. The resumes don't change. Ohio State would be the first one to go. But if LSU wins the SEC championship game, there could be an argument made that strengthens Alabama's schedule even more, that they flip and move past Ohio State, and that could be the committee's argument if they really want to go with Bama.
Yeah, and I think, look, power rating wise, I've said all year in a lot of the videos we've done, if you talk to the odds makers in Las Vegas, there's been 3 teams 6 to 7 points ahead of everybody all season long, and that's been Georgia, Ohio State, and Alabama, even ahead of Michigan. Now, obviously, that's probably changed here the last couple of weeks. Michigan has to be within a few points now, but they're still about 5 points behind Georgia. Michigan is, as far as the pure power rating would be if you're looking at the odds maker numbers. And Alabama has been right behind Ohio State. They're about a point behind right now. So there is some potential for that to happen. But on the surface, it would be really hard, I think, for a 2-loss team to pass a 1-loss Ohio State whose only loss came to Michigan. I know it was at home. It was a bad loss, but still, I would think that's probably locked in. But you're right. There's always some wiggle room there, and I guess LSU, Georgia would be that X factor. But look, the odds of both USC and In fact, I'll pull up the math. I haven't done the math here, but the odds of both USC at 58% and TCU at 56% winning, the odds of them both winning is 32.5%. So that means there's almost a 68.5 or 67.5% chance one of them loses. The odds of both of them losing, of course, would be 0.42 times 0.44. The odds of them both losing is 18.5%. So that's the math right there. 18.5% chance that both Alabama and Ohio State make it. 32.5% chance that Ohio State makes it. And obviously a little less, than that about, the odds that both TCU and them make it's about 67% chance that one of those teams loses. So we're likely to have a change in the playoff rankings come next week.
Steve, it's kind of uncommon for both teams competing for the American Conference Championship, even though that's been the best of the group of five, to both be ranked, as is the case with UCF and Tulane. The Green Wave are a 4-point favorite. These two teams got together a few weeks ago with UCF winning the game. And, of course, the winner has that edge for a New Year's Six bowl spot.
Yeah, so my database simulation, I run 10,000 simulations, different scenarios. The average victory margin is Tulane by 4.5 points in this one. So point spread of 4 is pretty much spot on. A little bit of line value with Tulane in this situation. Central Florida, very good rushing attack, averaging 244 yards a game, 5.5 yards per carry. When these teams played earlier this season, as you said, back on November 12th, 343 rushing yards, no turnovers. That's the concern here. If they have that kind of rushing dominance again, it's going to be difficult for Tulane. So, very rarely can you say you project the rushing dominance, but it is hard to see them not having the edge again unless Tulane gets out early and Central Florida has to throw a lot. And that's when Central Florida will be in trouble because Tulane has an excellent pass defense this year. 6 yards allowed against 7.5 on average. One of the most underrated pass defenses in college football. So this game really depends on who gets out early. And I think like an in-game live betting situation, we don't talk a lot about that. But if Tulane can get up early by, 7 or 10 points and Central Florida has to start to throw the ball more, I would like Tulane in game. So I'm going to take a sit back, wait to see how this game plays out. If it's close or Central Florida's up early, I like them. If Tulane can get up by a touchdown or more, I like them. So an in-game betting opportunity is probably going to be pretty good in this one on Saturday.
I want to remind everyone that you can catch Steve's work at wagertalk.com, NFL, NBA, all the college basketball as well, and also his money management system. And Steve's under the radar selection, which we have benefited from here at the Voice of College Football. 11-1 against the spread, folks. That's a crazy number. 11-1 this season against the spread, exclusively on patreon.com. Search MarkRogersTV. Join us there. All right, Steve, we get the Mountain West Championship. These are two of the marquee teams and programs in that conference that typically compete at this level, especially Boise State. Fresno State coming off an 8-4 campaign. Boise at 9-3 and a 3-point favorite.
My database simulation of 10,000 games has Boise winning by 3.5 on average. Point spread is currently 3, as you said. So you'd say, it's a half-point difference. But 3 is a very key number. It's the most critical number in all of sports betting when it comes to football. As favorites in college football in this price range are going to win by about 9% of the time by exactly 3. So I do think at -3 or less, the values with Boise State in this game. And from a matchup perspective, it is a revenge spot for Fresno from that October 8th loss, 40-20. And of course, that game was in the thin air and altitude of Boise. So, it's a situation in which they do have the edge, but they had a huge rushing edge. And that's what jumps out to me in that game, 316-99. And I don't think it was a total fluke because on the season, Boise's averaging over 5 yards per carry, Fresno just 4. Fresno's rush defense statistically has been a little bit weaker than their pass defense. And Boise does run the ball better than they throw the ball. So if they're able to establish the running game again, I think we could see a repeat of that first performance. And there is some line value with Boise State at -3 or less.
I'd like to remind everyone that for the USC, Clemson, Michigan, and LSU conference championship games and that insight from Steve, you go to those respective channels here at the Voice of College Football, and we're cleaning up the rest of the conference championship weekend with Steve right here. We've got the Sun Belt, Troy, 8.5-point favorite against Coastal Carolina. Coastal Carolina with an impressive record, but they're coming off a couple disappointing outings, and Troy hasn't lost since they got beat by that crazy Hail Mary against Appalachian State.
Yeah, this is a pretty good Troy team. 10-2, like you said, could easily be 11-1 on the season, and I think they're a little underrated because of that. Coastal, James Madison, a dangerous team. They were a powerhouse, and the FCS level they moved up this year, but still to lose 47-7. They were a 2-touchdown underdog in that game, don't forget. So it wasn't a surprise they lost. But 47-7 is a pretty disappointing showing. And they didn't move the ball at all offensively. Coastal had only 90 rushing yards, 93 passing yards last week. Could definitely say they maybe were looking ahead to this possible game. But I think it's more than that. I think they're not as good as they've been the past few seasons. Because keep in mind, Coastal's calling card has always been great offense. And they do average 6 yards per play, 9 yards per pass. But to put up only 7 points last week is a real red flag. And now they once again are on an underdog against a better team. And there is some value here. Is my database simulation 10,000 games has Troy winning by 11.5 points on average, yet they're only an 8.5 point favorite. So I like Troy in this matchup, and I really like this matchup, the passing game here, and that's what's going to enable them to win by double digits. They're an explosive passing team, average over 8 yards per pass attempt. Coastal's given up almost 9 yards per pass attempt. It's one of the worst pass defenses in college football this year. And then the flip side of that, Coastal's strength is throwing the ball. Troy has an excellent pass defense, 6 yards per pass allowed. Coastal's given up almost 9. That's almost a 3 yards per pass difference defensively. It's one of the biggest discrepancy I've seen in any game in college football this year, and it's a reason I think Troy wins by double digits.
Grayson McCall, the Coastal Carolina quarterback, one of the better players in Group of 5 play in recent years, 28-3 as a starter, has missed the last few games. That's one of the big reasons why Coastal Carolina has been down. He is supposed to be out for the remainder of the regular season and possibly available for a bowl game, but you got to think the percentage chance of him playing this week is low as well. MAC championship, we've got a couple Ohio universities going at it with the Bobcats and the Rockets of Toledo, as Toledo's a 1.5 point favorite in this one, Steve.
Yeah, I actually think there's some value with Ohio. My math projection, my database projection rather, has them winning by 2.8, almost 3 points. So I do think the wrong team is actually favored in this game, so I'll lean towards Ohio there. Based on that database projection. And then we'll dig into the matchup here to see if there is some value and some reason to back them. First of all, Toledo on the season, 7-5, 4-8 against the spread. So they've been an overrated point spread team all season. And once again, I think this line is wrong. Whereas Ohio's been 9-3 straight up, 9-3 against the spread. So the betting markets have been overvaluing Toledo all season. They've now failed to cover 5 straight games, Mark. They've won 2 straight up, but they failed to cover all 5 of those. Whereas Ohio has now covered 7 straight games, wins straight up and at ATS. So I'm not going to overthink this one. We got the better point spread team, the hotter team. And once again, according to my ratings, we get some value. The wrong team is favored. I think Ohio wins this one outright.
Conference USA's title is determined on Friday with Texas San Antonio basically playing a home game at home, Alamo Dome, against North Texas in the Mean Green. And Texas San Antonio a solid 8.5 point favorite, Steve.
Yeah, my favorite team, the Roadrunners, beep, beep. I love talking Roadrunners football. They had a really under-the-radar team a couple years ago, and if you recall, I think it was last year, they returned like 21 to 22 starters. They've really been building the program the last couple years. It's starting to pay off for them. Had a little bit of a tough schedule in September, also showed well this year. And overall, now they're 10-2 straight up. North Texas, the Mean Green, only 7-5. By the way, Mean Green are 7-5 against the spread, despite Texas San Antonio being 10-2 straight up. They're just 6-6 against the number. So they have become a little bit overvalued in the betting market. And after 3 straight covers, 3 straight non-covers, they did cover 3 straight there in early November. They failed to cover last week against UTEP, only won by 3 as a big favorite. Once again, probably a bit of a look ahead to this week. I think we'll give them a pass there. North Texas has failed to cover each of the last 2 weeks, including also as a double-digit favorite last week, barely winning by 4. So I think both teams, we're looking ahead to this week a little bit. We won't read too much into last week's results, so we'll look at the overall season metrics here. First of all, my database simulation, 10,000 simulations in the database, has Texas San Antonio winning by 8.7 on average, exactly where this point spread is at 8.5. So there's really not much value in this game. I think the line is where it should be. From a matchup perspective, San Antonio throws the ball extremely well. So does North Texas. Both are very average defending the pass. So I think we'll see some points here. And that's been priced into the line, unfortunately. It opened 66.5. It's now up to 69. I think that's some sharp money on the over, though, and the over is definitely the way I'd play this one.
It's a checklist that's going to pay off, folks. First and foremost, go to wagertalk.com. Check out Steve's selections, NFL, college football, and basketball, NBA as well, and his money management system. Check out all the conference championship previews with the betting lines with Steve on all the various channels, and my common opponents breakdown. So check out all the championship previews that we have provided here at the Voice of College Football. Get on over to patreon.com as well. Check out Steve's under the radar selection. He's about to give his next selection for this week. He's 11-1 against the spread. Steve, thanks so much for your time and expertise and being here every week.
I appreciate it, Mark. Always enjoy it.